you all for coming. This is not going to be one of the sort of high-level, go along to get along kind of keynote speeches. As my introduction said, I've been in application security for a really long time. I wrote the first OWASP Top 10 back in 2002, and frankly, it's still kind of the same stuff. I wrote WebGoat and Asapi and a bunch of other OWASP projects, and I love working with OWASP, but nothing has really changed in 25 years. That's crazy. And so I'm getting a little older, and I'm feeling a little more urgent about application security, so I'm going to share some ideas in this talk about what I think has to change. If you're in AppSec, I'm going to try and share with you how to deliver exceptional results, build trust, create collaboration, and not getting relegated to being a low priority compliance thing. That's the challenge, because frankly, that's where AppSec is. And despite 25 years of incredible research and work by people at OWASP and folks around the world, we're not making a big difference. The software of the world today is essentially the same as it was 25 years ago. Roughly the same number of vulnerabilities on average, roughly the same kind of level of attention to AppSec. We haven't really changed much. This room is more full, though. That's exciting. But to do that, it's going to take a new mindset. So I want to try to suggest a mental model that will help you focus on the right stuff. I want to take 1 second and share why I am so passionate about application security, and it really comes down to, well, first, I love software. I've been writing software since I was 13. That's a long time ago. And it's become truth that we trust everything important in our lives to software, right? It's your finances. Who here banks online? Yeah, come on, everybody, right? It's your healthcare, it's your social life, it's your elections, it's your military defense. Everything is controlled by software. How much do you know about that software that you have trusted your lives to? When you chose your bank, did you choose the one that's like got the best security story? Probably not, right? We don't have access to that information. It's because the market is broken. We don't have visibility into all those kinds of things. And so I want to try and push organizations towards that. So I want to talk a little bit about castles. Because we know how to secure castles, right? There's hundreds of years of experience securing castles, right? You start out, you imagine what the threats to your castle are, right? It's guys with battering rams, and it's, I don't know, flaming goats flying over the wall, whatever. It's attacks that you can do on a castle. And then you dream up some defenses, right? You put a moat and a drawbridge and a portcullis and some towers and some boiling oil and I don't know, those kinds of defenses. And then you design it, you build it, and then you've got your secure castle. And then you go on about your business. And tons of organizations have adopted this mental model of how to do security, right? These are a bunch of slides from companies that are using this castle model to explain how they do security, right? So this one says, hey, there's the next-gen firewall, that's the moat, and there's patching, and that's this thing, and there's vulnerability scanning that found a hole, and okay, so that's their model, and there's a bunch of these, and it's funny if you go online, you'll see like hundreds of these castle diagrams. The better ones are in 3D. And I like this one. It's got like the crown jewels in here, and I'm not really sure that that's how data looks, but you get the idea here. This one's interesting. It's kind of funny. It's got like these bullets and labels on the castle for things like encryption and data integrity validation and audit logs. And I think I'm like, okay, starting to stretch the analogy a little too thin, right? Like it's really not like a castle. And I like this one too because they went outside the castle. Also 3D, super cool. And They go outside the castle and they've got like the policy and processes is like the king and queen here. They've got the royal archives over here. And I like the vulnerability. I think it must have been the security guys who made this, because like the knight gets to be vulnerability scanning, right? They're the cool guys. So they extended the analogy a little more. This castle approach, I just want to summarize it, right? It's threats. You identify defenses to counter those threats. You maybe make some requirements. You build this thing. You test it, and then you're good. That's left to right. You're in operations, and you're good. Problem is, we try to secure software the same way that we secure castles. It's that same mindset that's in all of the standards that we've seen over the last 30 years. My first job, I worked on a big Navy project. It's multi-level security, Orange Book, mandatory access control, highly secure project, high assurance. And we followed this Rainbow series. And I don't know if you guys have ever seen the Rainbow series, but it's like 50 manuals, each of which is hundreds of pages long. And it tells you how to build stuff securely and get traceability from the threats all the way through the defenses into operation with assurance. And somewhere along the way, we've gotten dumber. Those guys from the NSA knew how to build stuff securely. In this castle way, they documented everything. And then over the years, we've gotten like slightly more and more simple, which is weird. But if you look at OpenSAM, there's like, I don't know, 120 practices in OpenSAM. It's a good standard. ASVS got a couple hundred requirements in it. It's all, it's a little less than what they had in the Orange Book in the Rainbow series, but less. Gartner's DevSecOps model, less. The NIST SDF is like 35 practices, something like that. And the PCI SSF, another model, it's actually got a few more than that. But the trend here is not fantastic. We're simplifying application security down and down and down. And I try to figure out why we're doing that. And you would think it would go the other way, right? Like we'd get better and better and more detailed application security, but it's not. And ultimately, I think it's just, we've just tried to simplify that castle model down to the minimum steps that can get you into production and check the box. That's what these standards are about. It's checking that box. Are you a secure castle? So, unfortunately, this castle approach hasn't delivered. If you look at the statistics about application security, they're awful, right? So if you just, I try to break it down by different teams' view of application security. Development, application security creates huge backlogs. 95% of the stuff that we find with the traditional tools out there is not exploitable in production. There's a IDC study that says 19% of developer time is being spent on security activities. 19%. It's crazy. Scans slow down the pipelines. They kind of irritate development teams. And there's 1,000 new CVEs coming out every week to deal with. From the security team, I think most people probably agree there's not a great relationship between development and security. That's unfortunate. AppSec is isolated from operations. Who here is in AppSec? Okay, decent number of people. Keep your hands up if you talk to operations every week. Okay, there's a few, and that's great. Congrats, that's really wonderful, but that is not enough. And mostly, security teams don't have much insight into what's happening in production. Don't know about what attacks are happening. And then in operations, I've talked to, I don't know, probably 200 CISOs in the last year. And I asked them, what do you do in production for AppSec? And the answer is either not really anything or we have a WAF. And then the second question you should always ask is, what happens to the data coming out of the WAF? And usually it's, well, it goes into Splunk, and then no one looks at it. we're not really relying on that data. We don't know what's happening in production, and that's really one of the main points of this talk. We've got to fix that. And it is important, right? Like the Verizon DBIR, if you've read it, you know that AppSec is like the second leading cause of breaches. It overcame phishing in this last report. Like it's growing incredibly fast. So it's a super important thing that we have almost no visibility into. So I want to put it to you like this. Your application layer is more like a city than it is like a castle. Now think about that. A city is way too big and complex to analyze. You can't just scan it, right? It's constantly under construction, it's highly interconnected, it's got virtually unlimited attack surface, unlimited vulnerabilities everywhere. It's always under attack, and it's relied on by people and businesses and government, and they're working and interacting in a live, running city. It's not a static blueprint for a castle that we're going to analyze. It's a working machine. It's got a zillion parts. That's the mental model that we have to have in security, because we've got to adapt our thinking. We can't secure it up front. It's way too big, way too complicated. We've got to get more involved with what's real in production. And I'm going to dive deep into that in just a second. Okay, so here's the interactive portion of this talk. So which of these is true? The Earth is the center of the universe. Life spontaneously generates from inanimate matter. Your personality can be determined from the bumps on your head. And shifting AppSec activities left improves outcomes.
None of the above.
Correct. It's a trick question. You guys saw right through that. What do all these questions have in common? They are that. Well, I don't know. We can live in a. Yeah, they're really intuitive, right? If you didn't know anything, you'd say the Earth is the center of the universe. I mean, yeah, the sun's going around it. Like, yeah, we're absolutely the center of the universe. All of these things seem normal. They put a bunch of meat under like a glass dome, and they waited a while, and poof, flies came out. They're like, life, spontaneous life. And that's what's going on with shifting left. It makes sense. We shift security left so that we don't get vulnerabilities later on. But unfortunately, it doesn't work. And I know I'm right because Gartner said shifting left is dead. And if Gartner says it, then you know it's got to be right. It's an interesting little paper he writes, but he's not wrong. Here's how I think about it. So back when I was working on writing Pascal on mainframes, which probably dates me a good bit, we had performance problems. And how we solved it is we would get some consultants to come in with their briefcase full of special tools, and they'd sit around for a month, and they'd write a white paper, and they'd hand it to us, and they'd suggest some things that we should do. And sometimes it worked, most often not really. Then APM tools came out in the 2000s. And they started selling to development. They thought, we'll shift left. We'll empower the developers to do performance work. So tools like New Relic and Dynatrace and AppDynamics, they tried to sell to development. And very quickly over the course of several years, they discovered that you can't really test performance in development because those systems aren't real. They don't have real users and they're not even fully assembled applications often. They're not real backend connections and real data. So if you run those tools in development, you don't really find where the real performance problems are. You have to move into production because performance requires context. If you want to analyze performance, you need that runtime production context in order to do anything. And that's where those tools, APM tools, moved into production. Today, everybody runs those tools in production and gets production telemetry that shows them how long their queries take and where their bottlenecks are and how their network lays out and all that. That's exciting. So the lesson you should learn is some problems should shift right. Not every problem should shift left. That's wrong. And security requires context. It's the same way that performance requires context, security requires context. And we need to look at it in production. So I updated this chart a little bit. Security testing requires production context. We're just like 10 years after performance figured this out. Shift left goes way back to like the 70s. There's a study at IBM that if you dig into it is total BS. They made it up. And the whole like underpinnings of shift left is just false. And people reference that study and reference those studies, and it just became a thing. But it's not real. And there's Mark Curfew did a really cool article about that I recommend. But I just want you to understand there's a reason why some problems that require context should shift right. It's way too inefficient to do them at the left when you have no context or very little context. And I'll give you some examples of that in just a minute. I mean, garbage in, garbage out, right? Like, okay, so put a pin in the shift left for just a second. Now, I mean, we've been hobbling along for 25 years with the castle model and kind of making it work. And frankly, some companies that invest a lot of time and effort and money into AppSec have done an okay job. It's not the majority. It's not really even a lot. And I've had the privilege of working with some of the best companies in the world on their AppSec programs. But AI is going to break it. AI, if you have AI-powered developers producing more code faster, even if it's, it may be more secure, it may be slightly less secure. It's really, we're early in the game to measure that. My guess is that it's roughly the same, which makes sense because AI is trained on the software that's out there, which is full of holes. So you're going to get the same level of vulnerabilities, but a lot more code. And that's going to break AppSec teams. At the same time, we've got AI-powered attackers. And we're starting to see serious evidence of rapid increase in attacks because now an attacker can be pretty smart about how they attack your application by using the power of AI to just generate much more tailored attacks rather than just running blind scanner kinds of tools. So I obviously generated this picture with AI, and I like the developer team in the middle. If you notice, the guy's hammer is on backwards, which just cracked me up because it's like a perfect analogy. We are going to this fight armed wrong. So something has to change. All right, let's get back to cities. Right? I mentioned cities. Let's talk about a real city. This is Singapore, and they're one of the world's leading smart cities. And what they've done is really incredible. They have established a sensor network over everything. You can see it's their transportation system, e-governance, smart utilities, smart healthcare, advanced security and surveillance, and smart homes and buildings. They've wired their city and built what they call a digital twin. Now, digital twins are used in a lot of industries, manufacturing industries and other industries. It's a digital model of the real world. And using that digital twin, they've been able to respond, to make a much more efficient government. They always have a model of what's real ground truth in their city. So they know what's going on everywhere. And because of that, their teams can respond much faster. They can deal with the real problems rather than trying to deal with theoretical problems where they don't have context. They've got all the context. Their teams can use this digital twin to collaborate. And I read some stories about how they were before this. They said, there'd be an emergency and multiple teams would respond. The fire department and maybe the power went out and it was all uncoordinated. So like the fire department couldn't communicate because the communications grid went down because they shut the power off. things like that. So having a smart city where they can respond to, in real time, to real things happening that matter is incredibly important if you're going to secure your digital city. That's your application layer. So let's summarize where we are so far. Castle approach, we talked about that. It's kind of left to right, and then you don't do much in production. You just say, okay, my castle's built, let's go. City approach, I think of it as top to, or bottom to top. You deploy sensors, you create a digital twin, a model of your application layer that's always up to date. You focus on the real issues and incidents, the ones that are actually under attack. We'll talk a little bit more about that. You can prioritize because you have tons of context. You can collaborate because now everyone's sharing the same data. And you can respond to application issues and incidents much more quickly. So this is the mindset. It's focus on what matters. I'll tell you now, you cannot fix all the vulnerabilities. I don't really care where you draw the line. Highs and criticals is kind of nonsense because, frankly, a SQL injection could be 100% the most critical thing you've ever seen, or it could be almost nothing, depending on the context. A SQL injection vulnerability may be on a read-only database with public data in it, and only admins can access it. Who cares? But your tool is going to mark it critical. That another SQL injection could be, unprotected by access control, could be public, could be connected to your most sensitive database. That's very critical, very easy to discover and exploit. So context-free risk ratings like CVSS scores, CVSS base scores that aren't tailored to your organization mean almost nothing. And so you can't prioritize if you don't have context. Okay. So your data model is your destiny. And most organizations, their data model is essentially lists of vulnerabilities. That's their AppSec data model, right? Does anybody have a database of vulnerabilities that they track? An ASPM or something that tracks a bunch of vulnerabilities? Is that like the center of your AppSec program? No? What I see is many organizations are focused that way. They build this giant database, they prioritize it, they work as many as they can, but they never make progress against it because it's just a huge list. And I want you to consider over the next few slides what it would be like if you had a knowledge graph of not just vulnerabilities, but the entire application layer. Here's what that looks like. So I want you to think of starting at sort of the bottom, like the business context. Like you know where your sensitive data is, what it is, it's classified. Your asset context is like sort of where those assets are stored, databases and other systems. Infrastructure context is about how does it fit into the network? How do the systems connect with each other? There's the software context, which is like what does that software do? How does it work? What are the routes? What's the attack surface? None of that is vulnerabilities or attacks. The vulnerabilities and attacks are like Christmas tree ornaments that decorate this graph. Right? You put the issue in context. So instead of saying, hey, this is a SQL injection and it's on this line of code, you say, hey, this is a SQL injection on this line of code, and here's the defenses that are in place to protect this thing. Here's the connections that are in place, the back-end connections, how does this work? Here's what that database has in it. Here's the systems that those things work on. Here's the blast radius associated with that attack if other systems might get compromised. That's context. And with that context, you can tell, is this thing critical or is it just a nothing burger? So how do you build that graph? You can do it with the tools you already have. At least you can start. You can instrument your application layer. I think runtime tools are better here because they're directly connected to what's running in production and they can watch what happens. But you can feed your static input into these tools, into this graph. Whatever data you have, I want you to assemble it into a graph model that describes sort of all of those layers of context. And you don't have to do it for everything at first. I think what you'll probably want to do is put sensors on the things you care about the most and build that portion of the graph, that slice of the graph, and then build it out. As you deploy more sensors, your graph gets richer and richer and things get easier and easier. So data from these sensors comes into comes from your application layer. The telemetry feeds streaming data architecture and goes into a graph structure of some sort. That's the flow, and this approach is sort of massively scalable. And when you have that shared graph, now your workflows can work together. So AppSec workflows are pretty siloed. So you might have a team that does pen tests. Those pen tests probably don't take advantage of a lot of information from other teams. They probably go in, they get a URL, they get the credentials, they start logging in, they start hacking stuff. But they're not taking advantage of the fact that some other team did a threat model, or some other team worked on the security requirements. Those are all separate activities, which is crazy. We do the same thing over and over in every one of those silos. So I want to try to eliminate that, because we've got to get way more efficient at doing application security to deal with the tidal wave of AI-powered software. We've got to get way more efficient. So there's a ton of wasted effort in AppSec that we can get rid of if we have a shared model where everybody can contribute their results. So if I do a threat model exercise, I can get the results that are currently in the graph, add my value, and put it back in the graph so everyone can benefit from it. Then the pen testers can use that. We'll go through some examples of that. But I just wanted to try to explain why the shared graph drives efficiency in your AppSec program. So let me give you a couple examples. So I used to do a lot of pen testing, and every one of them we'd start out trying to figure out, well, like, how does this application work? What's the attack surface? How does access control work? How does authentication work? How does do they use a database? Or are they using queues on the back end? Like, how does this thing work? It takes forever to just figure that out. But we don't have to do that. We could start off with a blueprint extracted from the graph. The first step in a pen test should be like, hey, get a blueprint of how this thing works. So imagine you're testing for expression language injection. It's hard, because you don't know where that application uses expressions, right? It could be anywhere in there. So that means you got to go through the whole attack surface, every endpoint, and you got to attack every cookie, every header, every form field parameter, every URL parameter, every multi-part piece. And you got to try and see if you can get it to respond to an expression. That's tough. That alone could take days. And you got 150 other things that you're supposed to be testing during that time. So it's really complicated. But if we gave the pen test team a blueprint, they could look through the routes that are all listed there and say, hey, I know there's these two routes that use expressions at all. And I could even see the pattern of the expression that they're currently using, and I could test it in a few minutes. That's the kind of savings that I'm talking about. Is we can make massive change to how AppSec works, not really changing the set of activities, just making them much, much more efficient. So that's pen testing. I'll give a couple of examples. I'm not going to do everything, but like threat modeling, I'd spent a lot of time doing threat modeling. And what's the hardest part of a threat model? Well, maybe not hardest, but what takes the longest? Anybody? Discovery, enumeration, I heard too. Yeah, it's like gathering the data for that app, right? And how do you gather it? You got to go around and get old Visio diagrams that aren't up to date. You got to interview developers, and it could take weeks to gather the information. When you actually get in the room to do the threat modeling exercise, those can go pretty quickly, especially if you're using standard controls. So that's the part that we can streamline, right? We can gather all that information automatically, generate a blueprint, and walk into the threat model exercise with it all, and you know it's real because it just came from production. And I like a graph model is perfect for AI kind of interfaces. And so I like to think of the threat modeling process in the future as working off the graph model. The threat modelers can ask it questions like, there's a list of things here, like, hey, show me all the pieces of this application. Which routes currently require authentication, or which ones don't? And you can verify the security of these applications. You can even ask complicated questions like, show me which routes consume serialized objects, and are defenses on those routes to stop unsafe deserialization attacks. So this is a much faster way of doing threat modeling. I'm going to spend a second talking about risk prioritization. Anybody here use a risk rating scheme? Which one? A lot of people use CVSS. Good standard. Anybody use anything different? EPSS. Yeah, interesting model. Kind of closed and based on attack prediction. Anybody else? Yeah. Oh, very nice. I wrote that like 15 years ago. Thank you. Nobody uses that, by the way. I was ahead of my time. So I want to talk, actually, Robert Hansen, our snake, just posted a really nice article about CVSS scores and some of the absurdities in it. Frankly, I don't have a strong opinion. I think like most risk rating schemes are pretty noisy, and it's good for an estimate, but it's not. I don't care if it's like picture perfect. But I did do some experimentation with CVSS4, and I was just trying to see what effect on the score does it have if you add details from production to the score. And there's like CVSS base score is like 7 factors, but then there's like 18 more factors in there that you can set to adjust the score based on your context, your use. So I just started experimenting a little bit. So I made some groups like, if that vulnerability is not under attack, and you know that, then you can adjust the score. You can set that factor and adjust the score. And actually, CVSS scores assume the worst. Not everybody knows this. But they assume that that vulnerability has been discovered and is being attacked in production. So that keeps the score high. They also assume that there's a critical asset associated with that vulnerability. Those two assumptions alone are not true 99% of the time. And so that means that your CVSS scores are inflated, always. And so you really should tailor them. Because obviously, if something is under attack in production, it's way more serious than even the same SQL injection, but is not discovered and not being attacked in production. You definitely want to fix the one that's being attacked first, right? So you need a higher score. So my study, I just generated a whole bunch of scores randomly and then started changing some factors to see what the net effect of that would be. And if it's not attacked, the score, it's almost impossible to get a high or a critical score in CVSS if that vulnerability has not been discovered and is not being attacked by attackers. So that would be a really interesting thing to know, wouldn't it? If you could tell in production that certain vulnerabilities are not being attacked, you could eliminate all but 1.7% of your highs and criticals out of your backlog. I think that's kind of exciting. And what will happen essentially is if you imagine your whole backlog and then you add these factors, most of the noise goes down. It's going to leave behind the ones that are really highs and criticals. Those are where you want to spend your time. It's the 5% of stuff that's really critical. That's why context is so important here, because we can't fix 100% of things, but we can fix 5% of things that are real. Are you with me? Okay. So I just wanted to go around the horn on these practices. Attack detection and response, we're not doing a good job. It's way easier with the graph. Vulnerability management, we can prioritize. We talked about that. Threat modeling, we talked about that. Penetration testing, we talked about that. Security compliance is an interesting one. If you're generating a graph based on what you see happening in production, you can easily generate compliance evidence from that graph and report it to whoever needs it. But it's always up to date. It's sort of continuous compliance. And then for supply chain security, really important to understand which components are actually in use in production. Anybody want to take a guess at what percentage of open source libraries are actually active in production applications? Say again? 2%? No, it's higher than that, actually. 10? It's actually 38%. So 62% of open source libraries that are in your apps in production never run. They never even get loaded into memory. And people are wasting a ton of time fixing those when they represent almost no risk. That's the whole crux of what I'm trying to point out here, is that we're spending our time on stuff that doesn't matter. And we've got plenty of stuff that does matter if we could just see it. So the city approach that I'm contemplating here, it's real, it's collaborative, it's prioritized, it's streamlined, it's scalable. Those are like marketing words. So I want you to ignore that. I want you to focus on a concrete example of using your AppSec budget wisely. Imagine that you've got 100 apps. Each one has 100 vulnerabilities over the course of a year. Then each of those vulnerabilities costs $5,000 to fix. And that includes detecting it, triaging it, remediating it, retesting it, redeploying it, all the whole cycle. I'm mixing in a lot of costs there. I don't think 5,000 is an unreasonable estimate for that. In fact, I think that's pretty low. But your mileage may vary. Fill in your own numbers. These are simple formulas. So if you wanted to fix all of those, 100 apps with 100 vulnerabilities at 5,000 a pop, that's $50 million. Anybody here have a $50 million AppSec budget? Anybody here have 100 apps? Okay, so what's going on, right? You can't fix all of those. That's what I'm trying to get you to see. We can't do it. Now, you could say, well, I'm only going to focus on the reachable ones. Well, that'll bring it down a little bit. Reachable is a static analysis technique. It makes static results a little bit better by calculating the control flow and saying, hey, that flaw actually executes. But it's not what actually executes. If you want what actually executes, you can go to production and watch what actually executes, and it's way less than what's reachable. So I want you to focus on, I'll call those active vulnerabilities. And then the last piece here is the real vulnerabilities. These are the vulnerabilities that are exploitable. We know they're exploitable because we see them getting attacked in production. They're identified by attackers and being targeted, and they're connected to sensitive assets. Those are the ones they want to fix first. And that's about 5% of the overall. So for that, you need $2.5 million. And I think that's in range for some AppSec programs. But I'm just saying, if you don't have unlimited money, then you got to focus on the things that are most critical, and it's worth it to figure out which ones are really on fire. So imagine your annual results. You're got to go brief the CISO at the end of the year, and you go in and you say, hey, here's my castle approach, and I've got $2.5 million that I spent using the castle approach. At the end of the year, you're going to know nothing about attacks. You're going to have detected 10,000 theoretical vulnerabilities. You'll have fixed only 250 real vulnerabilities, and kind of by accident, right? You choose at random from all the 10,000, and you're going to fix a bunch of real ones by accident. But you'll miss a lot. Your average time to remediate vulnerabilities is 8 months, which is kind of industry standard. And you're not going to provide any real assistance or visibility to development, and it's going to lead to a lot of frustration. Now, if you take the city approach, you've got your $2.5 million, you spend it You detect 4,800 real attacks, because the average application gets about 80 real attacks per month. Those are the ones that actually connect to a real vulnerability. So you got a bunch of attacks that you detected and stopped. You detected 500 real vulnerabilities and fixed 500 of those vulnerabilities. Your average time to remediate is about a week. You got security blueprints for all of your applications that you can give to threat modelers and pen testers and the rest of your team, and to developers. Because frankly, a lot of developers have never seen a good diagram of their app. And you can build up respect and credibility from dev and ops teams because you're delivering them things that are real, that are happening in production, that nobody can argue with and say, no, that's theoretical, that's a false positive. You're giving them things that they believe. And you're making your organization as secure as you can make it for that 2.5 million. The only catch is that you have to make this mindset change. You have to engage in production and realize that what's real in production is what you should be focusing on. So, my last slide. Castles are for fairy tales. It's time for AppSec to grow up. It's time to leave the castle, move to the city. It's time to pick up a shovel, instrument your city, leave the theoretical world behind, and become relevant. And that's my goal, is that AppSec becomes relevant and that we actually protect some of that software that's responsible for the most important things in our lives. So thank you all. I really appreciate talking to you all. The key to great threat modeling is great data. I don't actually care that much about trying to automate the threat modeling process, but automating gathering the data that tells you how a system works, that's the key to unlocking scale.
Hey, Jeff, can you give some tangible examples of deploying sensors to get this production context that you're talking about?
Yeah. I had a slide in there that listed a few great sensors that work at runtime. IAST has been around for quite a while. ADR is a great sensor, and runtime SCA all work in production to identify vulnerabilities and attacks and to build that model. I don't want to talk about my company's product. You can come by the booth and see what we do, but like, if you think about security observability, that's the goal of what you're trying to do, is put sensors that will observe how AppSec works and build that model for you.